So when you think about samurai, the swords, the armor, that whole image, have you ever wondered how it all actually ended?
Right. And maybe how much of that movie, The Last Samurai, was based on real events.
Exactly. So today we're diving into that, the dramatic story of how the samurai era really drew to a close in Japan.
Think of this as the essential guide. We've gone through the history, the accounts, and the idea is to pull out the really key moments, the aha insights, without getting bogged down in too much detail.
And we're looking mainly through the lens of the final stand of the Satsuma samurai.
Right.
A source that really zooms in on that decline.
Precisely. It gives us a great focus on the twilight of these, well, legendary warriors.
Okay, so before we get to the end, let's set the scene. Before, say, 1853, Japan was pretty much closed off, wasn't it? Sort of sealed itself away.
Absolutely. For, centuries, the Tokugawa shogunate had this strict isolation policy. Contact with foreigners, very, very limited.
Except for the Dutch, I think.
Right, a small group of Dutch traders were the main exception. And even they were kept on a tight leash, couldn't spread religion, that sort of thing.
Then, boom, 1853, Commodore Perry, American warships sail into Edo Bay, that's modern Tokyo. That must have been huge.
Oh, it was a shockwave, completely shattered that isolation. But, the Americans weren't just sightseeing.
No. What was the goal?
Well, their main goal was really about China. They saw Japan as a stepping stone, a strategic spot to help them exploit trade opportunities in China.
Ah, okay. So Japan was kind of caught in the middle.
In a way, and Perry's arrival just instantly highlighted Japan's vulnerability. It sparked a real sense of national crisis.
And the Americans didn't just ask nicely, did they? They used their naval power to pressure Japan.
Exactly. They basically forced the shogunate to sign the Treaty of Kanagawa.
Which did what? Open things up?
Yep. Forced Japan to open ports to American ships. That was the end of seclusion, the start of open trade, and it didn't take long for others to notice.
Let me guess, the Europeans.
You got it. Britain, France, Russia, they all came knocking, demanding similar deals. And they got them.
Wow. So Japan goes from total isolation to being forced open by multiple Western powers. I can imagine that didn't sit well with everyone. People must have felt like they were losing control, becoming almost like a colony.
Deep resentment is the word. A lot of people saw the shogunate as, weak, ineffective, failing to stand up to the foreigners.
And there were practical consequences too. Resources being taken.
Concerns about resources being exploited, poverty seemed to be increasing. It all fueled this feeling of national humiliation. A major backlash was brewing.
And that's where the opposition really starts to gain steam. Domains like Choshu and Satsuma.
Exactly. Those two were key, powerful domains with strong warrior traditions. Osa joined in later. They became the core of the anti-shogunate movement.
What was their rallying cry? What united them?
The big one was revere the emperor, expel the barbarians, Sanshi.
Okay, revere the emperor. Now, the emperor in Kyoto, he had symbolic power, religious authority, but not much actual political muscle at the time, right?
That's right. The shogun held the real day-to-day power in Edo, but the emperor was this incredibly potent symbol.
So how did he become the focus?
Well, Emperor Kume himself was actually strongly anti-foreign. He wanted the barbarians out. The opposition forces saw this, saw they could rally support around him, give their cause legitimacy.
And the emperor leaned into it.
He did. Seeing this growing support, he became more vocal, more assertive against the shogunate and the foreign influence.
To the point where in 1863, he actually issued an order to expel all foreigners. That sounds like throwing down the gauntlet.
It absolutely was a major escalation. It emboldened the anti-shogunate groups, led to more defiance, even open rebellion in some areas.
Did the shogunate try to clamp down?
Oh yeah, they tried. They suppressed some early attempts, but their authority was visibly crumbling. The momentum was shifting towards the emperor's side, the imperial loyalists.
Which leads us to 1867, and the shogun, Yoshinobu, abdicates. He just hands power back to the young Emperor Meiji. Was that an attempt to stop a civil war?
It seems like it was, yeah. A strategic move to try and appease the opposition, maybe preserve some influence for his family, the Tokugawa clan.
But it didn't quite work. The opposition wasn't satisfied.
Not the more radical elements, no. They felt the job wasn't done as long as the Tokugawa still held significant land and influence, especially around Edo. That disagreement basically paved the way for the next stage, actual war.
The Bushin War, 1868. So the emperor's technically back in charge, but things are still tense. What was the spark?
Well, the rebels, or perhaps we should call them the imperial forces by now, in Kyoto really wanted to completely dismantle the old shogunate power structure. Yoshinobu, the former shogun, felt pressured by his own remaining supporters in Edo.
So he makes a move.
He tries to. He gathers about 15,000 troops and marches towards Kyoto, his stated reason, to rescue the young emperor from these supposedly radical advisors.
15,000 troops sounds like a lot, but the fight didn't really happen, did it? His forces kind of lost their nerve?
That's a good way to put it. When they actually confronted the imperial forces south of Kyoto who were flying the emperor's banner, Yoshinobu's troops just didn't have the will to fight against the emperor.
Wow. That says a lot about where loyalties lay by then.
It really does. The shogunate's legitimacy had just evaporated. Seeing this, Yoshinobu pulls back to Osaka Castle and then pretty quickly escapes by ship back to Edo.
And that was basically it for the shogunate's military resistance.
Pretty much. It just dissolved. And later that year, 1868, Emperor Meiji triumphantly enters Edo, which is soon renamed Tokyo. A huge symbolic moment.
Okay, so emperor in power, shogunate gone. Finally, smooth sailing. Or maybe not.
Definitely not smooth sailing. What followed was the Meiji Restoration, and it was anything but calm. It was this period of incredibly rapid, radical change.
Modernization, right. Trying to catch up with the West.
Exactly. Sweeping reforms aimed at transforming Japan, its military, its industry, its government, even its culture, language, clothing. Everything was changing, and fast.
And the samurai, the very people who helped put the emperor back in power, they weren't entirely happy with this rapid change.
Many weren't, no. It felt like a betrayal to some. They'd fought to restore the emperor and, in their minds, expel foreign influence. But now the new government seemed to be embracing everything Western. It felt like the foundations of their world were being pulled out from under them.
Especially with the abolition of feudalism in 1871. That must have hit them hard.
Oh, incredibly hard. That single act dismantled the whole system they relied on. The domains they served were gone, their status as retainers, their stipends, their social privileges.
Their whole reason for being, in a way.
Exactly. Their purpose, built up over centuries, was just evaporating.
This is where Saigo Takamori becomes really central, isn't he? From Satsuma, a key player in the restoration, but then he turns critical.
Yes, Saigo's fascinating. He really embodies that conflict. He helped create the New Japan, but he was also deeply rooted in traditional samurai values. He just couldn't stomach the pace and the extent of the westernization.
What was his main issue? The loss of samurai status.
That was a huge part of it. He worried about the samurai spirit being lost, but it was also about the direction of the country. He clashed with the emperor's inner circle, who were all about consolidating power, building a modern state, even if it meant alienating their original supporters.
And there was a specific breaking point, something about Korea.
Yes, that was a major flashpoint. Saigo argued strongly for invading Korea, partly maybe to give the samurai a renewed sense of purpose. The emperor and his government rejected the idea.
So Saigo walked away.
He did. In protest, he resigned all his government posts and went back home to Kagoshima in Satsuma, and a lot of loyal samurai followed him.
And he set up schools there. Shigak.
That's right. Private academies. They taught traditional samurai skills, but also modern military tactics. It wasn't necessarily meant to be a rebellion hub, but it quickly became one. Disillusioned samurai from all over flocked there.
So, by 1876, Kagoshima is basically a center of potential resistance, with Saigo as its figurehead. The government in Tokyo must have been getting nervous.
Very nervous. They saw Saigo's influence growing and viewed it as a direct challenge, and they kept pushing reforms that hit the samurai where it hurt.
What? More restrictions?
Yeah, they cut their remaining stipends, banned them from wearing swords in public, a huge symbolic blow, and even took away their right to execute commoners who disrespected them, basically stripping away the last vestiges of their special status.
So tensions are sky high. What finally ignites the Satsuma Rebellion in 1877, the final stand?
Well, our source points to a couple of things. There were attacks by some of Saigo's angry students on government arsenals in Kagoshima, and crucially, there were rumors, possibly true, possibly not, of a government plot to assassinate Saigo.
That would do it.
Right. Whether it was real or not, enough people believed it. Saigo himself might have been hesitant, but events kind of overtook him. His followers pressured him, and he felt compelled to lead them.
Lead them where? In Tokyo.
That was the idea. March on the capital? Ostensibly to present their grievances directly to the emperor. He set off with about 12,000 samurai. They even had some modern artillery.
12,000 sounds like a lot, but the Imperial Army? They were much bigger and better equipped, weren't they?
Massively so. The government had something like 57,000 troops. modern rifles, a national police force. The odds were heavily stacked against Saigō from the start.
And Saigō's forces marched in winter. That must have been tough.
Incredibly tough. January 1877. Their first major target was Kumamoto Castle. They laid siege to it in February.
How did that go?
Not well for the samurai. The castle garrison, only about 4,000 strong, put up a surprisingly fierce defense. The samurai couldn't break through, they got bogged down digging trenches, a long, drawn-out siege.
And while they were stuck there, the Imperial Army wasn't just sitting around, right?
No way. General Yamagata led the government response. They used their naval superiority, landing troops by sea on Kyushu Island to relieve Kumamoto, but also to outflank the samurai.
Smart move. Did they go for Kagoshima?
They did. Since Saigō had thrown most of his forces at Kumamoto, Kagoshima was left relatively undefended. The imperial forces managed to capture it. Saigō's home base, gone.
So Saigō realizes Kumamoto is a lost cause.
Yeah, he has to retreat, split his forces. The rebellion continues for months, but it's a fighting withdrawal, really. They lose key towns, supplies dwindle.
They switched to guerrilla tactics for a while.
They tried, yeah. Moved into the mountains, places like Miyako Nojo, but the Imperial Army just kept coming, superior numbers, better supplied. They took Miyako Nojo too.
It sounds like they were just being pushed further and further back.
Relentlessly. Nobioka became their last major stronghold, but that fell in August. The Imperial Army was tightening the net, even landing troops further north to block any escape.
Which leads to this Battle of Ino-Dake Mountain. Was that the breaking point?
Pretty much the end of organized resistance on a large scale. Saigo's forces were cornered, depleted. He held a final war council. Everyone knew it was hopeless.
What did they decide? Surrender.
Saigo apparently wanted to break through, try and save his closest followers. At least his men wouldn't abandon him, but the situation was dire.
And then he managed to escape.
Yeah.
With a small group.
Incredibly, yes. Under cover of mist, Saigō and maybe a few hundred loyalists just vanished from Ino-Dake, slipped right through the imperial lines.
Leaving thousands behind.
Yes, around 8,000 samurai were left with no option but to surrender.
News of Saigō's escape must have caused chaos back in Tokyo.
Absolute shock, and frankly fear. They were terrified he'd become this legendary figure, rallying resistance from the shadows. The hunt for him intensified massively.
Where did he go?
Amazingly, he circled back. In early September, he reappeared near Kagoshima, his home city, with only about 500 men left.
500. Against the entire Imperial Army presence there.
Yeah. They tried briefly to retake the city, failed. They were forced onto Shiroyama, a small hill overlooking Kagoshima, their final stand.
And this time the Imperial Army wasn't taking any chances.
No escapes this time. They surrounded Shiroyama immediately, built barricades, brought up artillery. It was 30,000 Imperial troops against Saigō's 500.
Just overwhelming odds.
Completely. The bombardment started around September 10th. Just relentless artillery fire onto that small hill.
Did the samurai fight back?
Fiercely, but their ammo was running out, casualties mounting fast. By September 23rd, maybe only a couple of hundred were left standing. The government demanded unconditional surrender.
They refused.
They refused.
So the final assault, September 24th.
Dawn. A massive artillery barrage, then the infantry charged. In the fighting, Saigō was hit. A bullet, mortally wounded.
The end for the great leader. And he performed seppuku, the ritual suicide.
Yes. According to the accounts, he was assisted by one of his closest followers, Meiji Restoration, who then took his head to prevent it falling into enemy hands.
And the remaining samurai.
Knowing Saigō was dead, knowing it was all over, they drew their swords and charged. One last suicidal attack into the imperial lines.
Wow.
And that was it. The rebellion was crushed. The modern imperial army had won. It was the definitive end of the samurai as a powerful force in Japan. That chapter was truly closed.
So, wrapping up this deep dive, we've gone from Japan's isolation through the shock of opening up, the Meiji Restoration's rapid changes, and ended with this really tragic final stand in Shiroyama.
Yeah, it's quite a journey. You see how external pressures forced massive internal change, the incredible tension between modernization and tradition, and the real human cost of it all.
And the end of this warrior class that had defined Japan for so long.
Exactly. It wasn't just politics. It fundamentally reshaped Japan's identity.
And thinking back to The Last Samurai, you can really see the echoes, right?
Yeah.
The resistance to change, the figure of Saigo Takamori providing that inspiration, even with the Hollywood adjustments.
Definitely. The core themes are rooted in this history.
So maybe a final thought for you, the listener. This whole story makes you think, doesn't it? About how societies handle change, that constant push and pull between progress and holding on to tradition.
Right. And it makes you wonder what change is happening today, things that seem necessary or inevitable now, might have really profound, maybe unforeseen consequences down the line for future generations. It's a powerful story to reflect on.